In the book of Exodus, God chose an Israelite by the name of Bezalel from the tribe of Judah. He blessed him with wisdom, understanding, and knowledge to artistically craft the gold and silver, the woodwork, stonework, and precious gems that would adorn the temple, the Old Testament home of God's Spirit on earth. Today, we can only imagine how beautiful these works of art must have been. Much like Bezalel from the book of Exodus, Michelangelo also had a gift from God. Where Bezalel was tasked with building the Ark of the Covenant and the tabernacle, Michelangelo was commissioned to create some of the most famous works of art, such as the statue of David and the painting of the Sistine Chapel. Many regard him as one of the greatest artists of all time. Even centuries after his death, his iconic paintings and sculptures lift our souls and inspire us to reach for the divine. Born in 1475, Michelangelo was an Italian sculptor, painter, architect, and poet who exerted an unparalleled influence on the development of art across the world.
A number of Michelangelo's works of painting, sculpture, and architecture rank among the most famous in existence. Of all the artists of the 16th century, he is best documented. Many of his works survive to this day. He sculpted two of his best-known works, the Pieta and David, before the age of 30. The Pieta is housed in St. Peters Basilica, Vatican City. It was commissioned for the French Cardinal Jean de Bélier, who was a representative in Rome. Carved out of Carrara marble, the sculpture was made for the Cardinal's funeral monument, but was moved to its current location, St. Peter's Basilica, in the 18th century. This famous work of art depicts the body of Jesus on the lap of his mother Mary after the crucifixion. Michelangelo's interpretation balances naturalism with the classical style of the Renaissance.
Michelangelo claimed the block of Carrara marble he used to work on was the most perfect block he had ever used. And he would go on to polish and refine his work more than any other statue he created.
The scene of the Pieta shows the Virgin Mary holding the dead body of Christ after his crucifixion, just before he was placed in the tomb. One of the 7 sorrows of Mary, this is one of the key events of her life and the subject of devotional prayers. Michelangelo's talent is obvious in the carving of the drapery and the human forms. Christ and the Virgin both retain a tenderness despite the tragic nature of the scene. Mary's in graceful acceptance. Christ is depicted almost in a peaceful rest, rather than a recent victim of torture. Mary's right hand does not touch Christ's body directly, but is protected by a cloth. This could signify the sacredness of Christ's body. There is an inscription on the diagonal band running over Mary's torso. About this inscription, in a work about the life of Michelangelo, Vasari gives comments. One day, Michelangelo, entering the place where it was set up, found there a great number of strangers from Lombardy who were praising it highly, and one of them asked one of the others who had done it, and he answered, "Our Gobbo from Milan." Michelangelo stood silent, but thought it something strange that his labors should be attributed to another, and one night he shut himself in there, and having brought a little light and his chisels, carved his name upon it.
This was the only work of Michelangelo to which he signed his name. Vasari also reports the anecdote that Michelangelo later regretted his outburst of pride and swore never to sign another work of his hands. St. Peter's Basilica is a church located in Vatican City within the city of Rome. Michelangelo was one of the principal designers of this hallowed place. St. Peter's is the most renowned work of Renaissance architecture and the largest church in the world. It is considered one of the holiest Catholic sites, and by many people of faith, the greatest of all churches in Christendom.
According to Catholic tradition, the basilica is the burial site of St. Peter, one of Jesus' apostles, and also the first bishop of Rome. St. Peter's tomb is supposedly directly below the high altar of the basilica. A church has stood on the site since the time of the Roman Emperor Constantine the Great. Old St. Peter's Basilica dates from the 4th century AD, and construction of the present basilica began on April 18, 1506, and was completed on November 18, 1626.
St. Peter's is a famous place of pilgrimage for Christians all over the world. The Pope attends a number of services throughout the year, both within the basilica or at the adjoining St. Peter's Square. These services draw audience numbering from 15 to 80,000 people. St. Peter's has many historical associations with the early Christian church, the papacy, the Protestant Reformation, the Catholic Counter-Reformation, and numerous artists, especially Michelangelo. As a work of architecture, it's regarded as the greatest building of its age, and many would argue the greatest building of all time. To Michelangelo, the Sistine Chapel ceiling was far from the grandiose accomplishment as we see it now. It caused him personal turmoil, and he was grateful when the enormous task was finally completed.
The Sistine Chapel is a large papal chapel built within the Vatican between 1477 and 1480 by Pope Sixtus IV, who the chapel is named after. The ceiling was painted by Michelangelo between 1508 and 1512 at the commission of Pope Julius II. When you enter the chapel, you can't help but look heavenward with deep awe. In the center of the ceiling decoration are 9 scenes from the book of Genesis, the creation of Adam being the most popular. As you gaze upward, marveling at Michelangelo's creation, he reminds you of God's creation. The task of painting the ceiling placed Michelangelo under tremendous strain. He wrote to his father in Florence, "I lead a miserable existence. I live wearied by stupendous labors and beset by 1,000 anxieties. And thus I have lived for some 15 years now, and never an hour's happiness have I had." At the end of his commissioning, he wrote very simply, "I have finished the chapel I have been painting."
Arguably the most famous sculpture in the world, Michelangelo's David was sculpted over the course of 3 years, beginning when the artist was just 26 years old. Most depictions of the era show David post-battle, triumphant over Goliath's severed head. But Michelangelo revealed David in an almost casual position, just before the fight. David was a man of supreme confidence in God, and his casual lean suggests that he wasn't even concerned about the fight at all.
And David said to Saul, "Let no man's heart fail because of him. Your servant will go and fight with this Philistine." The sling is barely visible and not the focal point of the piece, possibly suggesting that the fight was not about weapons. Then David said to the Philistine, "You come to me with a sword and with a spear and with a javelin, but I come to you in the name of the Lord of hosts, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied."
So it could be argued that Michelangelo depicted David closer to his character than any other depiction. Because David was not the greatest warrior, although he was great, the characteristic that set David apart was his supreme trust in God and gave him the confidence on the battlefield. David trusted God and was deeply devoted to him.
He raised up David to be their king, of whom he testified and said, "I have found in David the son of Jesse, a man after my heart, who will do all my will."
And these are just a handful of the masterpieces for which Michelangelo is best known. But did you know that Michelangelo also wrote poetry? His writings reveal a bit more about the personal faith of this brilliant man. In fact, we can see that toward the end of his life, his faith seemed to deepen. In his own words,
"Neither painting nor sculpture will be able any longer to calm my soul, now turned toward that divine love that opened his arms on the cross to take us in."
Much like himself, Michelangelo's works reveal a humanity that is both glorious and deeply flawed, tortured and peaceful.